Afternoon, everyone. If you're just joining us, we're just going to give it a few more minutes just to allow folks who are in the waiting room to arrive, and we'll start very shortly. Thank you for joining us. Sophie and Meta, how long do you guys want to wait?
Are these all the 17? Are these all the participants who have arrived so far, Keishan?
Yes.
Yep, I'm admitting the waiting room as they come.
Okay, great. Well, it's a nice intimate group. I'm happy to start off, and we've got some opening slides, Kosal, that you'll lead us through. So perhaps by the time we're through that, there'll be some more folks who've joined us.
Is that okay? Should I begin the slide deck? Yeah, Kosal? Okay.
Okay, that works for me as well. Yeah, go ahead. All right. So yes, so Keishan is just letting folks in, and so as we wait, I think the first few slide decks are really great. To start off, welcome to our final workshop of the year for Data for Change. And so before we jump into the project objectives and whatnot, I'll maybe hand it back to you, Sophie and Meta, to start us off. Or am I starting off? I'm sorry. Let's see the project order. Oh, Sophie, you're on mute.
Okay. Well, why don't we could start off with, we were going to go through these slides, but we could start with an introduction. We could ask folks to introduce themselves in the chat as well. So we could just introduce the folks who will be speaking today, and then we could move into the framing for the project. Does that sound good, Kosal?
Yes, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, great. I can lead off. My name's Sophie Llewellyn. I'm the Director of Evaluation with Logical Outcomes. We'll talk a little bit about who Logical Outcomes is in a few slides. And I'm joined by my colleagues Neil and Meta. Neil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everyone. My name is Neil Price. I'm the Executive Director at Logical Outcomes. We've been around for quite some time, 12 years, I think now, and delighted to be joining this initiative today. Thank you.
Thanks,
I'll pass
Neil.
it to Meta.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Medha. Some of you who've attended the workshops before have seen Sophie and me. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about logical outcomes and what we do. And it's really great to see everyone here today.
And please, if you haven't, I'm looking at the chat and I don't see any introduction. So if folks don't mind letting us know where they're coming from, that would be fantastic.
Great.
Kosal, over to you.
Yes, and in the meantime, as we're waiting for folks to join us and to see who else is in the room with us today, I can start and kick off the project. And again, welcome everyone this afternoon for our last session. This is our before our final community of practice, where we'll be speaking a little bit more later on today, just about what to expect towards the end and our last in-person session. But really great that folks are beginning to put in where they're from and who's attending. So welcome everybody. If this is, and I know this is lots of folks have been joining us throughout the year, but I always like to start these sessions with really anchoring of why we're here overall for the social data identity data collection project, and really to anchor us as a sector to the purpose of the project. There's always these three purposes that we show, and we always remind folks just about the collecting of social identity and the importance that it matters for you. So whichever and wherever you're joining us from here in Toronto or the GTA, what does social identity data collection mean for your agency? How would you like to collect it, and what does that mean for you? We're also looking to also build a community to advance data collection, especially for folks and to get better outcomes for the folks that we're serving in our communities. With that objective, we ultimately want to begin to socialize the data collection methodology and the use of the tools, the tools that we've been sharing over the course of the workshops, but also methodology and thought that we've been sharing throughout the sector here. And so we were hoping that, what we practice and what we're sharing here really does have a ripple effect across the community social services sector and have provided you with resources and thought around how data collection looks and feels for your own agency. So next slide, please. This is our third time running these series of workshops. And this year, it's been a wonderful year working with our partners here at the table. And this wouldn't have been possible without the many partners that are able to anchor this model. This model was designed by community coming out of the second iteration of our model. We're really wanting it to anchor into the community social services sector, folks who are really well known in it and are able to guide their work and support in their work. The model here is highlighting 3 partners. The CASA has been supporting us with the community of practice, convening the community to just explore a little bit more around how to practice some of the tools in the workshops that we're hearing. SHIP has been at the table sharing as well a lot of their own organizational best practices, the way they're collecting social identity data, the tools and resources they've been using. And Logical Outcomes has also been sharing their work within their community, working with clients, working with communities, working with other funders in various ways, and how social identity collection is practiced within the community social services sector. And Find Help 211, where I come from, I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships there, and have been really holding the project from a convening space and really trying to bring partners together and host the project not only on the virtual platform, but also on a web-based platform, which is here in the Knowledge Mobilization Hub, and creating that online space for folks to go to after all of these workshops are completed. We always upload and paste and put the project there. So hopefully folks are able to leverage both these online learning opportunities and also the Knowledge Mobilization Hub, which is the go-to website. So next slide, please. And if you've been joining us throughout the year, we have really designed this Data for Change throughout as a natural process of how organizations and cities that are and organizations that have joined us throughout the workshops and throughout the year here has been a natural stage of planning and an evaluation and that natural stages of what folks would be considering social identity data collection methodology. So, and these are staged with all of our partners, naturally staged, and we are here on the 4th stage of sharing use, and we are looking at learning for improvement. So really, I hope that if you've missed anything, we can always redirect you to our online platform. Yeah, next stage. And so as we go through these workshops, and I often remind ourselves, especially if you're in evaluation or in any of the work that we do in the nonprofit sector, it can always be hard, right? And so to please pace yourself, to take care of yourself. And we have key points here for you to take a look at and remind yourself to, step away if you need to, if the content gets hard, if the reflection, or if you're starting to think about your own work and the complexities of your own work. If you need to step away, please do. But know that you're not alone in this work, and we also feel free to reach out to us if you need additional supports throughout any of these materials that we're sharing today or before that we've done. Next slide, please. Again, if you've missed anything or would like to review or download any materials and whatnot that have been shared throughout the course of this workshop, please feel free to go to the dataforchange.ca website. And even after this project, there will be ongoing materials that will be uploaded and engagement opportunities there as well. So please make sure to register, review the links. If you've missed any of the videos, they're all there. And just really excited that you're all here today, and we can dive into the next page. That will take us into our land acknowledgement and open us up for today's workshop. Again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I think we're going to have a really good summation and walkthrough of where we've been, but also like how we can reflect, especially as it relates to community. And I think you're all going to enjoy today's workshop. Thank you, Neil, for being your special guest today and joining us. We're very familiar with Sophia Mehta, and been wonderful walking us through materials, but it's lovely to have you join us today, and we look forward to all 3 of you in your presentations. So the floor is yours, and again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kausal, and thanks for all the comments that you just shared, especially the reflection on well-being and taking care of oneself. I really appreciate that. So thank you for that. All right, let's start with our land acknowledgement. Logical Outcomes is based in Toronto on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. As people who live and work in this place, we acknowledge our responsibility to respect and uphold the treaties that govern this land. These include Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize the enduring relevance of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, a treaty between Indigenous nations in the Great Lakes region that binds the peoples who inhabit this land to share it well and protect it. When I was looking around for an image that I could use for the land acknowledgement, I landed on this beautiful mural from the West End of Toronto, and I'll just tell you a little bit about it. It's a mural called "The Original People Leading to the Eighth Fire." It's a collaboration between Philip Cote or Cote, I'm not quite sure, a Cree elder, teacher, and artist, and Jim Thierry Bravo, a first-generation Canadian artist with roots in Ecuador. It was commissioned by the Roncesvalles Village Business Improvement Association in partnership with Street Art Toronto in 2018. And I just think it's first of all, it's a very beautiful and moving image, and really brings so much vibrancy to a neighborhood that I know well in Toronto. And I think it's just a lovely embodiment of the hope for good things that that we express when we acknowledge the history of the land that we are working on, and just a wonderful symbol of reconciliation. Okay, let's move forward. So just a little bit about Logical Outcomes. We are a Canadian nonprofit with a mission to build evaluation and learning capacity. We offer research and evaluation services, monitoring, evaluation and learning systems, evaluation coaching and capacity building, and increasingly AI solutions for nonprofits. And as I've commented in previous workshops that Meta and I have done, we're very much in the thick of working in data for equity. So we are struggling with the issues that we're going to be talking about every day in our work. We're very much practitioners. We're not kind of floating above as experts, looking down at the work people do and passing judgment. We are in the trenches doing this work ourselves and doing our best as we figure it out. So today will be, I'm really delighted that Neil Price gets to join us, and we'll be drawing on Neil's experience as well as Meta and my own to relate some of the content that we're sharing to actual work that we've done in community. So our goals for this workshop is the first thing that we will cover today. And then we're going to talk about the data lifecycle. So when we started these workshops back in, I suppose it was the springtime, it seems a long time ago now, we started by grounding the workshops in the data lifecycle. So we'll go back to that and revisit that concept. We want to talk about the rationale for sharing data back with the folks who share their data with our research and learning teams. We'll get into audience analysis and how to do that, how to share data internally within a working group or a project team, sharing data back with community. And Neil is going to share his experience and guidelines and suggestions for designing a data walk. And then we'll share some resources. And as we're going through this material, I would invite folks to ask questions in the chat. We will be taking turns monitoring the chat, and we also will have a time, we've planned some interactivity in the workshop, but I really do like to have a nice interactive workshop and would welcome questions. So our goals for today. We are here to support people taking part in the workshop to learn about how to engage staff in learning and improvement.
We're only one ticket.
Let's just make sure that we mute ourselves, everybody. Or maybe Keishan. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so how to engage staff in learning for improvement. how to integrate insights from data into existing workflows and decision making, and how to share results back with community in ways that are meaningful, but also really useful and can lead in ways that can lead to better decision making, greater insight, more relevant work. As we were preparing for this this workshop, actually, it was Meda who came across this report from ONN. ONN does fantastic work in this area. Their framework for nonprofit data strategies, and there's a comment there that really resonated with us. While there is a lot of data work happening within our sector, the data being collected is not often well utilized, rarely reflected back to organizations themselves, and almost never shared with the people and communities that have contributed to the data collection. And as evaluators, we've seen this so many times, largely because there's not a lot of resources available to do this work, and this work does take time and effort and resources, but also because there's not necessarily strong practices and strong cultures around data use and sharing in the nonprofit sector, as we've seen in Ontario. So we've seen examples of groups that know that they need to collect data, and so they collect the data. You know, they'll put a paper survey in front of participants in a workshop. The paper survey may include like rating scales and Likert questions, and then the data gets collected at the end of the workshop. Somebody flips through the responses, and it goes into a filing cabinet, and it's never seen again. And that's really quite common in the sector. So I'm hopeful that that the workshop, this information that we're sharing today, and some of the techniques that we're going to share, can lead to, you know, improvement on that front. Neil?
Can I add that that experience that you've just described sometimes happens even among funders. So funders are often notorious for asking grantees for a ton of data. And it's been put to me that on several occasions, even funders admit that despite that requirement in collecting that data, when that data comes in, they often don't know what to do with it. It often goes unexamined and certainly not actioned. So this issue of collecting data and not utilizing it, not capitalizing on the information that it provides is both at the community and social service agency, nonprofit level, as well as funders. I think they would admit that they too struggle with how to process that information and have it actually lead to improvements or actions. I just wanted to add that little anecdote.
And I've seen that too. I can say I've definitely seen that. Yeah.
Thanks, Neil. So before we go on to, talking more about sharing and using data, like Sophie said, we thought it might be worth kind of revisiting the objectives we started this project with, right? Like going back to why do we want to collect social identity data? What is data equity? Like kind of reminding ourselves about, that data equity is about making choices with data that prioritize the people and communities that we are trying to serve, right? And collecting social identity data can help us answer these very key questions and challenge our assumptions that we often might have about our clients, our programs, our services, and the impact they're having. So things like who's using our services, and on the other hand, who's not using our services, who might face barriers to access, who is benefiting most from our programs, and also whom could we serve better and how. So as we go through the sharing and using of data, it's helpful to kind of go back to the questions we first started with, like why do we want to do this in the first place, and how can data help us answer these questions?
Can I just speak to the context, the social and political context that we're in? It's clear that we're at a time where the idea of looking closely at inequities, at looking at inclusion, is under attack. And for many organizations, this commitment to look at social identity data is a stance. I just want to really put that on the table, that the commitment to do this, the commitment to collect this data, to look at it, to make use of it, and to then go back and improve and make decisions based on it is a stance. I think we have to just be really open that we're in a time where there are folks who don't want to go down this path. And so for the organizations that are committing to doing it, there's that full awareness that there's a lot of bumps in the road. There's going to be a lot of challenges in doing this. But I think what we're seeing now is organizations are saying, hey, there's no way without this kind of data that we're going to be able to address inequities. And going back to what Meta says, who's receiving supports and who isn't. So just want to put that on the table in terms of the context that this conversation is landing within today.
Thanks, Neil. This shows us the data life cycle. So through this entire project, we've kind of been through each of these steps. We spoke about data collection, how to process data, how to store and archive data, how data can be analyzed. And today we're going to really focus on the using and sharing of data. Like Kausal mentioned, the previous workshops and resources are available on the Data for Change website. So if you've missed something, you can always go there and find it, or you can reach out to us. Okay, so as we get into talking about sharing and using data, it would be great to hear from everyone who's here in the meeting about who's currently seeing the results of your data collection, of your data projects. So this could be any sort of data projects you have, whether it's like intake data, client satisfaction data, any other research or survey that you're doing. Who are the people who are currently seeing the results of this data? And you could scan a QR code or go to slido.com and put in that code there. Okay, great. So we're seeing some results come in. So board, management, broader community. Okay, that's interesting. Gonna give it just a couple of minutes for people to put in their responses. If you prefer to type in the chat, you can also do that. Okay. Interesting. So management, definitely. We're seeing a lot of. Some of the board.
Clients dropping.
Mm.
Yeah.
Also frontline stuff seems to be
Yes.
quite low.
Interesting.
Okay, gonna give it the last few seconds.
It's great that no one's saying nobody.
Right. Yeah.
It's also interesting that I guess people who are most engaged in the work are probably clients and frontline staff.
Right.
That's
And-
right. The people
and-
on whom the burden of data collection falls the heaviest
Yes.
are the people who, are least likely to actually see
See
the
the
results
result.
of the data collection and be involved in that way. Thank you, everyone, for filling this
That's
out. This is,
insightful.
yeah.
Let's go next. And this is about, okay, if it was up to you in an ideal world, what are the new groups that who you would like to share the data of your the results of your data projects with? And you can just type it in.
Advocates.
Clients,
Clients. Yeah.
service
Service
users.
users. Yeah.
Interesting. Alumni, so like previous participants or clients, I'm guessing.
Yeah, beautiful.
Public.
Public. And if you would like I love somebody who also shared the why of why they would want to do that. So if you also want to put that in, like what new group you would like to share the results with and why. Public seems to be a nice big
Donors,
word.
yeah.
Mm.
Colleagues, government.
Seems to
Any
be
last few
just in
entries?
policy making. Advocates.
I think there's one more person typing, and then we can go ahead.
I think what's interesting here is, I know we've said the word new, but no one has sort of reiterated management, which was the top choice in the previous poll. So there's this sense that if we think about that previous list, there's folks missing. So we're seeing the public, we're seeing advocates. So this is great. And it just goes to show that thinking around sharing data requires this kind of stepping back and asking ourselves who needs the data, who could benefit from seeing the results, and how do we ensure that when we collect data, we have these recipients in mind.
And I would think that each of these audiences, they would probably want to see the data or the results from a different
Yes,
angle, and would have each of their own needs
yes.
around communicating those results back, just to complicate things further for everybody. But we'll get into some, how to think about that shortly.
That's great. And I'm also curious if people want to type in the chat or even share, like when you're talking about sharing data with these new groups, like why do you think that's important? Like, like Neil was saying, we're seeing that some folks are missing. Why is that happening? And why does that gap need to be filled? If you'd like to, like share your views or comments, please feel free to use the chat. I'm going to share some ideas that we have about why do we need to share findings from data back with community. Starting with transparency. We want to be transparent about what we're learning. We don't want to just get the data and then hide it. We want to be open about, what are the strengths, what are the gaps, what are the opportunities or challenges. It's about ensuring accountability to those people who share their information with us. It's about data reciprocity, right? It's not just about extracting data from people, it's also about giving back information and giving back data. About ensuring communities' participation in interpreting findings from data, making sense of the data, validating what's coming out of the data, and giving people the tools and information they need to make decisions and help us make decisions about next steps. Because when we do share, data back with community, and we have this process where people are validating or making sense of it with us and helping us make decisions, the decisions we make are more informed, they're more meaningful, they're more relevant, and they're bound to be more useful. So it is really, really important to share this data back and complete that sort of circle and have data reciprocity. Like Sophie said, like when we're talking about sharing data with different groups, there's no one size fits all. It really becomes about, okay, who is the audience that I am addressing, right? So when we talk about, sharing data back or creating knowledge products or data products, it's important to ask first, okay, who is your audience? What are their interests? And what's the best way of communicating with them? So if you talk about funders, like that's your audience, what are their interests, right? Is it like accountability? What's the best way to communicate with them? Maybe it's that report template that they send when you first get a grant or something like that. If we're talking about frontline staff, they really want to know what's going well, how they can improve, what are the gaps. And maybe the best ways of doing that are doing a dashboard and then having a check-in meeting. Right? When you talk about community, maybe it's about creating an infographic or a website or something that's easy for people to understand. So doing this analysis is really important, and tailoring and testing the data products based on your chosen audience is important, because when we try to create something that's for everybody, it usually ends up serving no one, right? Like you really want to make sure we're tailoring and targeting whatever we're creating, whatever we're presenting to the audience we want to show it to. I've linked a We All Count resource at the bottom, which also has some nice like checklists for things to keep in mind when we're sharing data with different audiences. So that might be something interesting for folks to check out.
Can I just add something from my perspective? I'm seeing so much in the projects that we're leading, so much interest in figuring this out because what our clients are saying is that the traditional 25, 30-page PDF is just landing in silence. People are not reading it. It's hard to expect people to read it. And so increasingly, we're having to center this question really early on. How should we communicate the findings? What's the best way to do it? What's the best format? How much? What should be prioritized? So I'm just sharing that from my perspective. This is becoming almost like a key requirement in our negotiation around the project. Whereas in the past, it seemed to me that this was sometimes an afterthought, that we'd get to the report and then we would say, what other format would you like us to think about? But people are so stretched for time. There's so many things competing for our time that I'm finding that this question of thinking about the knowledge product nice and early in our design process, all the way back to when we're collecting the data, is becoming much more central.
Neil, I want to add on to that, but I also want to draw your attention to a really helpful comment by Rebecca that you may want to respond to. But just building on what you just said, to make it even more practical for folks, like we actually budget this in to many of the projects that we do. So when we're doing that initial requirements analysis around what is this project going to look like? What are the goals of this project? What are we hoping to achieve together? We ask questions about exactly this. Who are we going to share with the data with, and how are we going to share the data? And in some cases, we need to reserve resources to prepare an infographic that is going to land with folks, or we need to reserve resources to host a town hall where we can have a conversation, or to host an interactive kind of event where we can do the kind of data walk that Neil's going to talk about shortly. So we're actually, we recognize that this requires resources, and we actually hold them aside so that we can make sure that we are communicating results in a way that's responsible and useful.
And Sophie, just to add, or like having a community advisory group that we engage throughout the process. So also like that's another thing we often do, where we, again, build that into the budget, into that time and work plan as well, because when you want to engage folks, throughout the process, you also have to acknowledge that it does take time and resources, and we want to make sure we've accounted for that in the work plan.
And the budget, I've just shared in response to Rebecca. Absolutely, 100% agree with you in terms of that engagement and making sure that there's adequate understanding. But compensation, I'm also seeing the need to move away from, compensation that just looks like a kind of kind gesture, and now questions of what's a meaningful and appropriate compensation for that kind of engagement that you've described, right? Whether it's an advisory group or participating in the data collection itself or helping with design. So all of these things are now, and I'm encouraged to see this shift, but I'm finding in our work that they're far more common at the start, where we're asking these questions nice and early, and they're no longer sort of just add-ons.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Sophie.
Okay, over to me. So the next few slides, I wanted to talk about sharing data internally. So doing data collection and doing sense making, and actually figuring out how to use the results of data projects within a project team or within an organization. So how do you build a culture of organizational learning and reflection is the question, I suppose. Many times as an evaluator, I'll work with an evaluation working group. We'll come up with a set of questions, data collection tools. It's time to collect the data. Staff, frontline staff get involved often, too often at this point in the data collection. And really quickly, we see there's not much data coming in. And people will ask me, why isn't there data coming in? And the answer is often, well, are the staff actually, like, to what extent are staff involved in this process? To what extent have they been involved in planning? And are the results of the surveys, let's say, the tools that the frontline staff are administering, are they being shared with staff? Are staff adequately engaged in this process so that they're motivated not just to collect data to share up, but they're motivated by the excitement of learning and the confidence that the learning is useful and it's going to improve their lives and the lives of the people who the organization serves. So how to do that kind of thing well involves structuring regular data check-ins with staff. So usually it's all about leveraging an existing meeting, an existing workflow to share data back. So to share the results of, let's say you've got a client satisfaction survey. Somebody needs to be responsible for that survey, and that person should be bringing the results of the survey, even the preliminary results, back to the team so that the team can look at them and understand them, make sense of them together, and figure out what to do next on the basis of those results. And it's great to do that at a standing, quarterly or monthly meeting. Just make space for it in your regular workflows. Making check-ins equitable is really important. So I've talked about the importance of including frontline staff. And ensuring that sometimes the data coming out of a client feedback survey, it can include complaints and suggestions for improvement that may be a little bit difficult to hear. And so it's important to be aware of that and to prepare for it and to make sure that folks feel safe and that there's a spirit of kind of open learning and not a culture of blame, let's say, in those meetings. And part of the use of the data as it's coming back in, it's not just all about, clients are telling us that our coffee's terrible, let's change our coffee. I mean, that's a good thing. If you're hearing from clients that your coffee is bad, improve the coffee. But it's also, we're seeing that this question that we're asking isn't quite working, or, hey, we've learned a lot about our coffee. Let's ask another different question over the next quarter so that we can learn something else from the client. So it's all about coming back to that data collection plan, revisiting your priorities and your questions, and figuring out together how you want to move forward with your research or your learning projects. So here are some nice questions to guide reflection as you're looking through data or results coming out of data projects. What patterns do we see in who we're serving and who we're not? This is a classic kind of reach question. So like, who are we reaching with our programs and who aren't we reaching with our programs? Are outcomes different for different groups? So if you're using let's say it's a survey to gather insight into the outcomes that are being achieved, you do that work to disaggregate those outcomes by demographic factors, and you look really closely to learn about how outcomes might be different among different groups, and to think about what can be done to ensure that those groups who are maybe not benefiting as much from your programs, that the programs get tweaked, things get changed so that these groups can benefit too. What strengths can we build on? This is really important, actually. Part of the reason to share data back with the team is to celebrate your wins and celebrate the excellent work that is being done. So, so what's working really well, and how can we take those things that we're doing really well and apply them elsewhere? Where do we need to change? What do we need to learn more about? And what might not be captured in this data? So what do we need to learn more about? What additional questions should we ask going forward? What questions could we maybe remove from our data collection tools? So again, moving from data to action, this is kind of similar content that we've just shared, identifying gaps in reach and access and the needs that are being met through your programs. Figuring out these are some examples of actions that can follow from learning. So as a result of the learning that you're doing, you may decide to redirect resources, so reallocate resources to areas that are underserved or groups who deserve to benefit more from programs being offered, let's say. There's opportunities to identify new programs or services that may respond to the needs that you're seeing or the goals that you're seeing through the research that you're doing, make program changes based on client feedback, identify opportunities for staff training and development so that you can improve the way in which services are delivered. And again, review and reassess the data collection tools and processes that you have in place. We wanted to give some examples from the work that we do of how data can move through analysis, so how findings can affect inform actions and then outcomes. And so some of the examples that came to mind for us are stopping data collection that is clearly harmful and stigmatizing. And I'll just share an example of that, just like an everyday example. There's all kinds of data collection tools that are, maybe were developed in the 90s or even not that long ago that are floating around, that are in use by many organizations that, when you take a moment to actually look at them and think about the questions that are being asked are harmful and stigmatizing. And we've seen these in our work again and again. Reallocating resources to address emerging gaps, collecting new data to drive decision making. I think I'd like to just talk about this first example. We have on the next slide, we have this example of a tool. And this is a project that Neil is more closely involved in. So Neil, you may want to speak to it. I'll just say something really quickly about it, that we started this engagement with a group that we were working with. And this group had inherited a screening instrument from, it had been in use for some time, and nobody really quite knew why the screening instrument was in use. When we looked at the instrument, it was being used with, I think, all youth coming into this program. We realized that the instrument itself was quite stigmatizing. And not just that, it was really long. It was taking up a lot of frontline staff time. It was taking up a lot of time from the youth who were coming into the program. So not only were the questions on it, you can see this is just an example of some questions. They're very intimate, and some of them are quite harmful and offensive, and the time that was being taken by these youth who were just trying to sign up for a community program, having to sit through all of these questions, it just seemed really not the right thing to do to us. So the first action that we recommended was just get rid of this tool, and then we'll go find you a better one that's strengths-based. Neil, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I would add, not only was it offensive and the staff felt uncomfortable. This was what was interesting to me. They voiced concern, but didn't have a sense of empowerment to say, well, can we just not use this thing? It's come along with the funding. And so, there's a power dynamic sometimes that comes into play here where folks don't feel empowered to say, this is not good, this is harmful. So I think building a culture around, this is going back to what Sophie was saying earlier, building a culture around evaluation would have us pause if we encountered something like this to say, is this really aligned with what we're trying to do? And the irony was that it was not aligned. This was a diagnostic screening tool, but was put forward as an evaluation tool. So this was really about trying to do a pre-assessment to determine whether youth should come into the program or not. But of course, the program that we were working with, the agency that we were working with, doesn't operate that way. It doesn't screen youth in or out. They work with all youth. So this was actually completely misaligned to the purpose of wanting to collect evaluation data. So good example of, in this sequence, of, thinking about whether or not your data collection is useful, whether it's harmful, and then feeling empowered to make decisions like removing this tool. We did recommend that it was removed, and that recommendation was accepted, and so we're now in the process of finding a replacement.
That's great. I can speak to two other examples, again, talking about moving from data to action that you can take. Second one, which is about reallocating resources to address emerging gaps. We're working with an organization that is focused on addressing food insecurity. And through research, they learned that, newcomer groups are a high priority population group that needs support and don't always have resources for it. So based on that research, they then reallocated resources they had from a grant to partner with a transitional housing, building for newcomer groups and provide like programs and services for them. So it's a really nice example of, they're doing work, they get this research data, and then they reallocate resources to address that emerging need. The second one was about collecting new data to drive decision making. So we're working with, a health center, and they saw from their client data that a large proportion of their population they were serving was Black. And so they conducted a needs assessment focused solely on Black residents and service users to understand what are the goals of this group, what are the barriers this group might be facing, how can we support them to achieve their goals. So again, going back to what information do we not have, what information do we need, like what more things do we need to learn about to make sure that we're serving our clients and participants the best that we can. And these are some examples we thought of, very practical, again, from our experience that we could share. Okay. Neil, over to you.
Sure. So part of what we really want to get across today is this idea of sharing community back, sharing data, back with community. And I was encouraged when we looked at the word cloud a few slides back. Many of you are thinking along the same lines, that of those various groups, community and the public, I think was a synonym probably for community, comes up. And when we think about community being at the bottom of the traditional list of recipients, it's quite concerning if you think of it from a perspective that they were the ones who most likely participated in data collection. Their information, based on their lived experience, their insights, their knowledge, has been collected. And for that to not go back to them seems to run counter to the ideas of transparency, accountability, but specifically reciprocity. So increasingly, as evaluators and as people who are interested and have a vested interest in data collection, we're thinking about reciprocity. How do we make these relationships reciprocal? How do we ensure that communities have access to data? Of course, there's a movement now around data sovereignty. And we're hearing about decolonizing data practices. And this is to move away from extractive, one-way only kinds of arrangements where researchers traditionally have come in, done their thing, and I think, as Rebecca was alluding to in the chat, got what they needed, and then off they went to publish papers and achieve their academic esteem, etc. So we're emphasizing the need when working in community to take a community-centered approach that's guided by data equity. And here again, principles like co-design, testing, data collection, tools with communities. So, I'm proud to say at Logical Outcomes, we do a fair amount of this where We don't assume that a survey is going to work with the group. We often will have a small pilot group and we'll sort of work with them to determine whether it's appropriate. So that becomes really important. I'll talk later in this presentation about collective interpretation and give one example in how that can be done. Really, really important if you think about our work in collecting the data, analyzing it, interpreting it, and then writing it up. That's a lot of autonomy. That's a lot of power to do that, and to not have those interpretations checked or verified, validated, or contributed to by community seems like a huge lost opportunity, and just reinforces those imbalances that I mentioned. Sharing and validating the findings. And then, of course, what do we do with the data? So bringing community into decision-making about using that data are all guiding principles when discussing this topic of sharing back. And as I've said earlier, when I started in my consulting and research career 10 years ago, I would say it was not as common to, at the very start of a project, think already about who's going to use this data, how are we going to action the data, what's the knowledge mobilization plan. And I have seen a shift in the last decade or so where these principles, these ideas are now expectations rather than afterthoughts, as I said earlier. But I'll dig into a little more of this when I talk about setting up the data walk. Meta, back to you. Or is this still me? Apologies, I forgot our flow.
You can speak to it, or I can speak.
Okay, yeah, because I guess this is setting up for my piece. Another aspect here is ensuring that when you're thinking about sharing data, and this goes back to when we were talking about the various knowledge products, infographics, how much text, what formats, really, really important for you to think about accessibility and not assume that everyone comes to the knowledge product from the same perspective, the same levels of access. So, suggestions around plain language, stripping your knowledge product free of jargon and technical terms that really become barriers is really important. Of course, if you're working in diverse communities, as many of us are, ensuring that there's translation where possible. We know translation is expensive, but I think with AI and other technologies, I think we're starting to see ways to address the costs around language and multilingual translation. So making sure that your findings are in relevant languages becomes key. Formats, visual, infographics, dashboards, even verbal, oral. I've been on projects very recently where there was an idea, not so much of sharing the data, but part of our work often is a discovery session where we're learning as much as we can, where we're receiving data actually, as much as we can about the client. And we had a request to do this orally as opposed to receiving PDFs and documents. The request was, could we sit down and actually talk through who we are, our experience, our interests in this project, and we were open to that. So maybe it's a community forum where it's more discussion based than written. Of course, thinking about our commitments to AODA, if you're in the Ontario context, and making sure that people with disabilities are able to access your materials. And then culturally responsive, respectful, and equitable equitable presentation of your findings also becomes key. Again, there's certain terms, certain concepts that don't easily translate, and so you have to really think deeply about who it is that you're speaking with, how they process information, what language resonates with them, and then try to your best of your ability, ensure that you're meeting those needs. Sophie or Meta, anything you wanted to share around the accessibility piece?
Meta and I, in our last workshop on data visualization, user-centered data visualization, we covered the importance of ensuring that contrast in data visualizations or any kind of visual product is adequate, so that folks with a range of different people who may have reduced vision or visual impairments are able to access the materials that you share, and also about red-green color blindness, which is pretty common in the population. And so, designing, if you're going to design any kind of graphic, you want to make sure that you're not using those stoplight colors, because they're not going to be accessible by a good percentage of users. So we've talked about that in the past, and also about the importance of accessibility. It's not just when you're sharing results back, but it's throughout the process of data collection. So ensuring that data collection tools use plain language that, we'll often, actually talking about AI, we'll often use AI to do a grade level check, and to help us to ensure that our language is plain and it's accessible, and it doesn't get peppered with the kind of jargon that we might be using in our presentation today, for example. So that's really important too.
Awesome. So I just wanted to contribute today by highlighting one approach that I've used personally, and members of the team have used, and that's, when we have data to share, we've collected data, we've pulled together some preliminary analysis, and we now want an opportunity to have that data come back to the community for further interpretation and analysis. We use a data walk method. And I'm hoping that if this is unfamiliar to you, by the end of this presentation, you'll be intrigued by it. And certainly we will share some resources where you can dig in further into how to set up a data walk, its purpose, some guidelines. So this will be just a brief overview, but really what it's about is, as I said, ensuring that you're being guided by the principle of reciprocity, and this is one way to avoid the tendency to go off, collect data, do the analyses, and write up a report without this critical step of bringing stakeholders, communities into the interpretation itself. So the first thing you want to do if you're going to embark on setting up a data walk is to create a safe and welcoming space. I typically will do this in community, at a community center, or a space even that has been used as part of our work. I find it helpful to ensure that the people who are going to participate feel comfortable. So coming to them and setting up this opportunity in a space that's familiar to them is really key. And the goal in creating that safe and welcoming space really is to clarify what we're there to do, and how participants will be able to use the insights that we gather together. We want to explain how and why the data that's going to be presented in the data walk was collected. Typically, these are emerging themes or prominent themes through the preliminary analysis that you're bringing into the data walk. And it's perfectly okay to say that that's what you're working with in terms of the data. And the intent is to ensure that everyone in the room feels like they have an opportunity to engage in sense making, collective sense making, working with the research team or the evaluation team, and collectively deepening our understanding of what the data is telling us. So I like to start with that space and building clarity around what we're trying to do together. I find there's a kind of magic number that if you go over it, this can be a bit unwieldy. So I'm thinking if you've got a room that could accommodate up to 3 or 4 stations, you probably don't want any more than about 8 people at any given time at a station. And again, this is all dependent upon the space that you have available. If it's a really small space, you'll have to adjust those numbers. But what you're trying to do is build small groups that are sort of like cohorts, and they're going to go around together and journey on this walk, going through a number of different stations that you'll have to set up ahead of time. But what you want to make sure is that those groups are mixed. So what you don't want if you're working, let's say, with a community or youth serving agency, that all the managers are in one group, all the frontline staff are in another group, and community members are in another group. That's a lost opportunity for a process like this. You want those different perspectives in the group. But that means you have to ensure that you've done some of the work of forming those groups and ensuring that the power dynamics in those groups are monitored. Because obviously, if you've got a manager and staff right there, you have a power imbalance that could affect the interpretation process. So typically, small groups, 4 to 6 data stations set up. You'd have large posters so that it's nice and clear and visible. And you'd have maybe 1 or 2 data points per poster or per station set up around the room. And you want to make sure that those stations are far enough apart so that folks can have conversations and there's not a ton of noise and people are feeling comfortable. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So as I said, I've done this where I've only had 1 data point per station. So for example, there could be a finding around, since we talked about reach, who's coming into the program. And we have a data point around registration by demographic group or by age or whatnot. If there's another data point there, maybe it's related. And so there's an opportunity to have some interconnected discussion around those two. So you'll have to give that some thought. But again, the key here is to make it perfectly clear, avoid jargon, avoid technical language. And what you're trying to do at each station is get the groups as they move through the different stations to really grapple with no more than 2 or 3 questions. And those questions are designed in a way that they invite initial reactions to the data. Those can be positive, sometimes they're negative. The questions at the station should encourage deeper reflection about the data point and maybe explore meanings around it. And then I really love this third point that what you're trying to do is get people to think about how does the data connect to their own lived experience, either as folks who work in the agency or members of the community at large. So the idea here is not to overwhelm the stations with a ton of work, because you've got to get people moving through these stations. And so you probably want to think about 10 to 15 minutes max at any given station. If you've got 6 stations, you close to an hour it should take or so to cycle everyone through. So in terms of capturing the interpretations. Typically, you'd use Post-it notes. So there'd be a stack at each station, and folks can respond to the discussion questions and then post their responses on the chart paper at the station. And what I really like with this process is to invite subsequent visitors to the station to add to the data. So you get this nice sort of cascading effect of people responding to comments that someone may have left in the previous rotation, and it results in some really, really rich interpretation. You want those Post-it notes up at all the stations so that, as I said, when people are cycling through, they're able to see what others have had to say. That's really important, and they can respond in turn. So this gets really busy and really messy at times. So we have a couple images here. The first is, typically what you might have at a station. So you clearly have it numbered. There's the 2 discussion questions and then 2 data points, in this case shown on line graphs, but it doesn't have to be. They could be even a statement. It could be a statement that conveys the data point. So lots of flexibility there. And then by the time you have people starting to respond, you're going to get some messiness like this, where people go visual, people start circling other people's ideas and adding on to other people's ideas. It makes for a very rich experience, which as the researcher, of course, you want to photograph and document for your own purposes later on. Let's go to our next slide. So again, the space is key, but also the interactions. And so having the folks move around, encouraging folks to read the Post-it notes between rotations. You want a very vibrant, active, lively atmosphere, because in my experience, it's in those exchanges where folks are walking by each other and talking about the data that they're kind of doing that collective encouragement around the whole process. And it just leads to a kind of energy that makes the whole exercise worthwhile. What I like to do at the end of everyone going through the various stations is to then have a report back. So folks will end up at one of the stations. Maybe it's the one they started at. And here we're going to have a kind of collective report back where people will share insights from the stations, not verbatim, but maybe what's resonating, what's jumping out, highlighting convergence and divergence across the different perspectives, and answering questions like what surprised the group, what was confirmed by the data, and were there connections across the different data points that can be made. So I find, to close out the process, bringing the whole room back and getting out of the kind of group silos is a really rich way to get that final sense-making opportunity. There are some challenges with this. As I said, it does take a fair amount of coordination, monitoring of time. One of the things I've seen is, people get really animated and into a discussion, and then they forget to move. And so you get a little bit of a traffic jam. So the need to move around and engage with folks and politely encourage them to move on to the next station becomes key. And keeping an eye on, because there's a lot of autonomy and a lot of movement, keeping an eye on those dominant voices and ensuring that in those groups, there's a good sense that people are all invited to share their interpretations, and you're not having, 1 or 2 people really guiding the whole process. So I would say managing the time and monitoring that the sharing is truly equitable. Sometimes there's the need to pause if someone feels really troubled by what's shared. And we've done this in community where we have support people on hand because, you know, people can have different responses to different data. And so if you're doing this in community, think about the supports that you might need to ensure that anyone who feels impacted has that support. And what I try to do just to keep it reflective and to keep it about the interpretation is to kind of politely discourage the solution making. Sometimes what I find is folks want to get to solutions. They've seen the data and now they want to say, well, this is what we should do. This is what we should do. And just remind folks that that's the next phase and that we're still in an interpretation phase. We're trying to make sense of the data and then, you know, obviously engaging the community, developing recommendations becomes something you can do after this. Okay, I think that might be the end for me. I hope that was helpful. Just as I said, a quick overview of setting up that data walk, and we'll be sure to share resources that will allow you in more detail to understand how to set that up. Okay, Medha, back to you.
Thanks, Neil. I'm going to talk about this quick example and maybe you can chime in as well. Just sharing some more examples of sharing data, sharing findings back with community. And one way could be a community forum or a town hall. And we did this for one project recently where we did a needs assessment and we collected information through interviews, to focus groups, to discussions. We did a session where we had our preliminary findings and we held 2 community forums where people were from, you know, the whole community were invited to come in. We shared what what was emerging. We got their input on it. We created like little table discussions where people, you know, shared their insights, what was missing from the data, what was resonating with them. We did that work. And then towards the end, when we had like our findings, we had our recommendations, we went back to community. We held a town hall where we shared all of the learnings we'd had from the project and the recommendations that, you know, we came up with based on the data, and shared that with everybody. And what was really great was that the lead of that organization was also there, and you know it really speaks to accountability and transparency because we shared the data, we shared the recommendations, and the lead actually, you know, went like one by one through each recommendation and said, okay, based on this recommendation, this is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it. Second recommendation, this is what we're going to do, when and how. And it was really wonderful to see actually, you know, like the recommendations come to life. And for people to, you know, use that time to ask questions, say, okay, no, you know, like I want to know more about this, or by when will you actually do this? And how can we be updated and how can we track this? And it was just a really wonderful experience to have. And it was great to see, you know, people were really invested and they really cared.
Yeah, and as I've said to the team, that those are rare moments where you see that direct involvement from management, giving a very public account of how the recommendations will be actioned. And it was great to see. And I think also because what we're also seeing, and I'm sure many of you are who are involved in research and engaging community, there's a fair amount of burnout with processes like this and data collection. And it can be hard to get people to buy in and to participate because they feel like they've done this before and they haven't seen change. They haven't seen action. And, you know, in the example that Medha is giving, you know, that's a really powerful way to kind of address that, to don't wait weeks, months to come back to community and say, this is how we're acting on the data, but do it in a reasonable short period of time, and show that this data has not been collected without a clear reason, and that it's leading to concrete decision making that the community has inputted on. So just a great example of how all these elements of reciprocity, engagement, accountability, transparency has led to decision makers using that data in a very visible way, in a very public way, articulating those decisions in front of community, which was great.
Okay, we have a few more examples. Sophie, do you want to speak to this one?
Sure, yeah. So this is the next couple of examples. They're less around engaging with community to do that sense making, to talk about next steps. They're more about cool ways of sharing learning back with community. And so this is a picture from MassMoCA, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. I got to take a road trip down to Massachusetts the summer before last, in slightly different political circumstances, I suppose. And I got to go to Western Massachusetts and visit this amazing, it's just an incredible art museum. And that's my family there in the foreground. But as I entered into the lobby, you buy your tickets and you go in to check out the exhibits. I was so excited as an evaluator to see this like data space. And folks you can zoom in on Zoom. So if you want, you can kind of zoom in and take a look at some of they're basically KPIs, like the key. Oh, there you go, Meta. That's great. The numbers that are being shared here. So as a visitor to this space, I get to see, how many other visitors have come to this space, how big this space is, how many school kids have come through this space since 1998, I think it is when it was founded, how many pencils have been sold, how many dumplings have been sold in the cafeteria. And some of these are just really fun facts. But it also really gives you a sense for the effort here and the organization and the institution and all the work, the amazing work that is done at this place, and all the people who are taking part in it and contributing to it and walking through that space and interacting with the various exhibits. So this is obviously an organization like this has a lot of artists on hand to do beautiful work of this kind. But it made me think, a social service agency with a public space where people are coming in and receiving services. If you have a lobby, you can use those walls. You can create a poster. If you're serving youth, this would be an amazing project for a youth group to run, to learn about the organization and to create some kind of visual installation or just a poster to share some of that information back with community. So I just wanted to share this as sort of an inspiring example of really visually engaging ways to share data back. And this is a more kind of prosaic example from work that I did with a fabulous multi-service agency a couple of years ago. The staff and management and staff and certainly clients in that agency worked really hard over the period of a couple of months to run a client satisfaction survey across all of the programs in this agency. So 800 survey responses were received, which is a lot of data. Really was a big effort, and the aim of data collection was to certainly capture impact and improve services, and it happened to be timed in the months leading up to the AGM. And so as the AGM approached, there was a plan already in place to share this data in a way that would be meaningful to community members coming into the AGM. And that particular group, they wanted to be able to hand people a two-pager. They wanted to be able to, or one page of paper and it's got two sides, and you're holding these results, and they prepared a short presentation as well on the learnings and some, in this case too, decision making that was happening coming out of this learning activity. So in this case, what I did was use infographics to just bring these findings to life, make them accessible for the folks who were coming into the AGM so that they could look at it at a glance and quite quickly see, get a sense for some of the achievements that this organization has. Yeah, and it was quite easy to do. I mean, that is in contrast to the Mass MoCA example. These are just Microsoft icons. You know, they're available when you make. They're available in PowerPoint, so they're quite accessible, and you can see we use these in a lot of the work that we do. Medha, do you want to speak to some of these resources?
Yeah, this brings us towards the end. These are some resources we thought would be helpful. There's some accessibility toolkits and guides. There's the framework for nonprofit data strategies that we mentioned before. Then these two resources talk about data walk. So there's full instructions, guidelines, templates for conducting a data walk. So if you're curious about learning about how to do a data walk, you could check these out. And then this last one is a resource from We All Count that I mentioned before that has checklists for when you're creating data products to keep in mind for different audiences, questions to ask yourself, things to keep in mind. And that brings us to the end. This is a feedback form. If you want to give us feedback on this workshop and this entire series, please do that. We'd love to know, what you liked, how to improve it for next time, what you took away from it. It would be great for us to hear that. And if you want to get in touch with us, that's our email address. You can use that. You can also message Sophie, me, Neil right now, and we'd be happy to chat as well. But yeah, we hope you found this useful. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, if you have any comments, any stories you would like to share from your own experience of working with data and doing data projects. That would be great as well.
Yeah, we have time for questions and discussion. Just 7 minutes. I know we have a hard stop at 3 p.m. We want to let everyone move on to their next meetings. But yeah, love to hear some questions or hear about other people's experience doing this kind of work.
Some folks have to jump off.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. It was great.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. Hope you found it informative. Additional workshops. I think this is our last. Is it?
It is our last as part of this series for sure. Yeah, Kosal?
And we love for folks who are here just to pencil in December 3rd. We'll be sharing out promotional materials soon, and a personal invite to everyone's inbox around our last community of practice, which is currently being planned for December 3rd, and it will be an in-person session to close out the final series. So again, we'll share more materials once it's out, but I really appreciate today, and thank you all for participating this afternoon. Have a good one. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, and we'll share out the link for a copy of the materials, but we encourage you to go to the website, which we'll share out in the link again in the chat.
Right. I think the website has been shared in the chat.
Yeah.